For 500 years, the chess game of the Mad Queen, or what we now think of as traditional chess, has been an exceptional tool to teach tactical development. On this episode of the Evolving Warfighter, I'm going to give you 10 challenges to increase the difficulty of chess so the game more likely resembles what you might encounter on the modern battlefield. This will allow you to develop your tactical, strategic, and leadership development. Welcome to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and today I'm excited to talk about the game of chess and how we might modify the game to make us better strategic leaders. To put in the most simplest of terms, the concept of intelligence is the ability to solve a problem. Chess is a wonderful game as it presents a consistent problem. It only has one strategic goal: kill your opposing king. A major advantage of chess is the fact that it is based on skill and not on luck, since individuals take turns moving pieces around the board. One of the beauties of chess is while it only presents one single problem to be solved, the amount of moves and length of each game that can be played on a single chessboard exceeds the number of games that could be played in a lifetime. So while the game remains consistent, the playing of the game is very varied and diverse and can vary greatly from one individual to the next. In this way, it presents a game simple enough to win, but complex enough and entertaining enough to keep us engaged throughout the course of our lifetime. While the turn-based nature of the game of chess and the balanced forces on each side of the board may be advantageous to develop base-level tacticians, it may actually be a disadvantage to train advanced-level strategic thinkers. So without further ado, I'm going to present 10 ways to change the rules of chess to engage higher-level thought processes and develop your strategic skills. The first recommendation I have for you is to play games with unbalanced forces. On the example on the screen, I removed a bishop, a knight, and a rook from the black side. The rest of the rules of the chess remain the same for this game. You might find some interesting things when playing games this way. If you're on the weaker side, you may find that you want to move your pieces in a way that they are not removed from the board. Even trading pieces for equivalent pieces, for example trading a knight for a knight, will severely damage the weaker force more than the stronger force. This is an excellent way of playing if you're playing against a new or novice game player and you're at a higher skill level. You can play this way to allow basically a weaker or untrained chess player to get to know the game of chess while presenting a harder challenge for the more experienced player. I've played countless games of this nature trying to teach my sons how to play the game of chess. Now, if you play against someone of your own skill and ability, it becomes a truly challenging game to see if you could survive with less pieces on the board. And let's face it, how many times in the history of warfare have equal-sized armies met themselves on the battlefield? It is the exception and not the rule that forces inside combat would be of equal strength and ability. My second recommendation I have for you is consider playing a game with unbalanced military technology. Let's face it, militaries do not invest and purchase in the same type of technologies. The historical example of this is during the First World War, when they were pioneering the concept of tanks. The German military only fielded 20 German-made tanks for the battlefield. However, the French military produced over 4,900 Renault tanks for that same conflict. We can apply this to the game of chess. Imagine playing a game of chess where one side only is allowed to have bishops but no knights, and the other side is only allowed to have knights but no bishops. How would this change on the battlefield affect the strategy? How fast could you adapt to the change? The third recommendation I have for you is consider playing a game that has troop replacement. When militaries go to war, they do so with a plan to replace their fallen soldiers. To do this effectively, you're going to have to keep track of what round of gameplay you're on at any given point in the game. It might be helpful to keep a pad of sticky notes to write down the number or what rotation of gameplay that piece can return back onto the board. There is a rule saying that if the piece is going to be returned back to the board, it must be put in the place that it would have originally begun at. Therefore, a pawn must return to one of the 8 positions that a pawn would have started the game at. A knight would have been in one of the 2 places a knight would have been placed at, etc., etc. If for any reason all the places on the chessboard that they could have been originally placed are occupied, then that piece cannot return back into play until those spaces become available. I found it interesting when I played a game with troop replacement that I developed more of a World War I mentality. It was less costly to lose a piece because you knew that it would return to the board at a later gameplay. Therefore, I found myself willing to trade pieces more aggressively than I've ever had before. This is interesting how it could put me back in the mindset of maybe the First World War general. Additionally, I found this game very difficult to play with the suggested return rates listed on the board, because it simply returned pieces back onto the board at a rate that it wasn't very effective in terms of trying to get checkmate, because new pieces were constantly returning to the board that were interfering with plans. It makes for a very complex and a very long game of chess, but one that you might find very rewarding. One variation on this game would be to have a different troop replacement rate for each side of the board. This would happen in real life where countries have a different rate of recruiting and training their forces. How would this difference in troop replacement rate affect the game? The fourth recommendation I have for you is consider playing with geographical barriers. It is very rare to find a totally open battlefield. Usually you have to deal with either natural or man-made barriers. An easy way to add this to a game of chess is give each player a coin at the beginning of the game. They can place this coin on any open position. Once it's placed on that position, you cannot land on that space or pass through that place. This would be like adding a mountain range or some type of tank barrier onto your battlefield. An advanced version of this game is to add barriers or contaminated areas, say nuclear, biological, or chemical, after so many rotations of gameplay that more and more spaces would become unpassable. If you're continuing to add barriers during the course of your play, if for some reason one side cannot attack the other due to the result of barriers completely crossing the chessboard, that game would result in a stalemate. The fifth recommendation I give to you is the use of captured equipment. The use of this in military history probably goes back to antiquity, when soldiers would strip the bodies of the dead for better weapons or armor. In modern history, such as in World War I, Germans used to take captured tanks, repaint them with German markings, and send them back towards British lines. In World War II, both sides were known to remark captured equipment and use it for their own purposes. To apply this game to chess, you will need two chessboards. The chessboards will be rotated, so each player has a set of white pieces and a set of black pieces. There are 5 rules to this game. The first rule is the game ends when either one of your kings is removed from the board. The first individual to remove his opponent's king, either one of them, wins the game. The second rule is there is no requirement to announce check. The third rule, when it's your turn to play, you can either move a piece or you can add a piece that you had captured in a previous move, if you have a piece available. Fourth rule, if you add a piece to the board, you cannot add a piece so it would immediately check your opposing king. And finally, if you're adding a pawn to the board, you cannot add a pawn to the back row so that they're immediately promoted to queen. In this game, players take turns rotating through gameplay. In this example, I've marked what turn it is by the use of the yellow star bouncing around the screen. While I showed this game being played among 2 players, it also can be played among teams, with one individual handing captured pieces to their teammate to use against their opponent. In many ways, playing this game resembles fighting a 2-front war. Since the game ends by taking either king on either board, players may temporarily risk the security on one board to temporarily gain the powerful pieces of their opponent so they could play it on the opposite board. It becomes an interesting balance of strategy and tactics in terms of, do you risk compromise on one board to maximize your ability on your other board, or do you attempt to play 2 traditional style games of chess as you go along? The sixth recommendation I give to you is consider playing on unusual chessboards. Abandon the standard 8x8 or 64 space board for something more complex. This may be non-standard shape boards, boards that require you to play on several levels, or even multiplayer boards. Adding multiple players to the game of chess significantly changes the strategic goals. No longer do you have a single goal of defeating the enemy king, but you have an additional goal. Whether it's building an ally, or at the very least, not creating another enemy while you're playing the game. The seventh recommendation I have for you concerns evolving military technology. I have a couple of historical examples of this. Consider 1941. When America entered a war against Nazi Germany, Nazi Germany's main fighter aircraft was a propeller-driven aircraft. Throughout the course of the war, there was a great push on military technology development. At the end of the war in 1945, the Nazis had to develop jet aircraft capabilities, an aircraft that could fly higher and much faster speeds than that of the aircraft available in 1941. An example from the United States Army is during Operation Iraqi Freedom, when U.S. forces initially invaded into Iraq. The primary vehicle used was the Humvee, a flat-bottomed, lightly armored vehicle. Due to the impacts of improvised explosive devices, the U.S. Army quickly developed technologies to basically defeat these threats, resulting in the MRAP series of vehicles. One possible way of adapting this type of shifting of military technology onto the game of chess is to create two decks of flashcards. On these flashcards, it would give two different technological advancements for each piece on the chess board. Individual players could go through and select which advancements they desire and what order they wish to have research conducted. Then the players would decide at what rate would these new technologies appear on the battlefield, say every 15th or every 20th round of gameplay. Players would flip over the cards in order and have the benefits of whatever technology advancements they wish. Some ideas of these technological advancements would be the possibility of a pawn moving 2 steps forward with every turn. Or maybe the pawn would have the ability to take a piece moving 1 step forward. A suggestion for the bishop might be its ability to take 1 step to an open space and shift to a different color. The knight could gain more territory in terms of 4 extra spaces it could move to. Now it could be the inside or the outside based on the desires of the player. The queen could pick up the additional movement of, say, the piece of the knight. One of the interesting things about this techniques is you may see players choosing parallel designs with their pieces, as if there was a good theory that caused many armies to do certain research to advance a certain area of design. A good example of this might be the use of semi-automatic rifles during World War II. You may also see a dramatic differences in technology changes. But just like the modern battlefield, we must accommodate and learn to adapt to the knowledge that enemy infantry will have different capabilities than friendly infantry. Enemy armor is going to have different capability than American armor. Therefore, we need to keep in mind that these pieces are not interchangeable, and we must adapt and learn from the capabilities of our units and their units. One interesting thing of setting up the gameplay where the players order the technologies they wish to research into is the fact that the pieces that they're wishing to research may be removed from the board by the time the research is actually conducted or that card is flipped over. An example of this might be Nazi Germany researching into jet aircraft but not actually having the materials and manufacturing facilities available to manufacture what were proven designs for jet technology. The eighth recommendation I have for you, it's based on a theory first recorded by Karl von Clausewitz of a fog of war, also translated as a smoke of war. It's the fact that military members have to make decisions based on uncertain or unknown facts, and they must have to take the course of what they perceive as the most likely enemy situation or position on the battlefield. There are 5 rules to the game. The first rule is the king must be removed from the board to win the game. The second rule is checks will not be announced. The third rule is that pawns attempting to move forward and occupy what they believe to be an empty space, if there is actually a piece in that position, the pawn will remain in the original starting place and that turn will be lost. but they will gain the valuable intelligence of knowing that there's a piece directly ahead of them. Additionally, if a pawn attempts to attack a space that is later found to actually be empty, again, the pawn will remain in the original place it started from, and the turn will be lost. But they will gain the knowledge that that place is actually void of any pieces. Finally, pieces such as a queen, bishop, or rook, if they're moving across the board, what is believed to be empty spaces, if they encounter an enemy along their path, they will be stopped and placed in the position of wherever that enemy piece is. The example I have for you here is if a queen was attempting to move from alpha 2 to hotel 2 on the board, but there was an enemy bishop on echo 2, the queen would be stopped in echo 2, the bishop would be removed to the board, and the mediator would explain what happened. As I explained earlier, this game is played across 3 boards. Each of the 2 players have a board, and a mediator has a master board. Neither of the 2 players can see their opponent's boards, nor can they view the mediator's boards. The play begins by the first player announcing what piece he's going to move. He is only required to state the starting position of the piece that he's moving. At that time, either the mediator observes his board or he hands a note to the mediator saying where that piece is going to be moved to. The other player must deduce where that piece may possibly move. This is an excellent game because it constantly forces players to think of the enemy's most deadly courses of action, and they must plan accordingly. As the game is played, it is relatively easy to lose track of pieces on the board. This game heavily tasks memory because if you realize a piece has been moved onto or through a space where you believe another piece is, you can try to mentally go back through the moves in your head to try to relocate the misplaced piece onto another possible place that they could have been placed on the board. Throughout the game, it's the mediator's job to announce that if pieces are taken and the location of the pieces taken off the board. In this way, it's very much like an actual battlefield. Typically, movement on the battlefield is easily noticed. So you can tell the enemy's location while they're moving, but may move track of them as they move. Additionally, you know instantly where the enemy is if they've attacked you. As I played this game, I realized my pawns were not very useful pieces other than detecting enemy attacks. I also noticed during this game that the knights were maybe the most powerful piece on the board just because of their flexibility of movement and how fast and how quickly they could move across the board. They were the most difficult of all pieces to predict where they were actually going to land. I deeply enjoyed this game because it reminds me of a quote from Napoleon Bonaparte. He said, "You must not fight too often with one enemy or you will teach him all your arts of war." This is very true in terms of playing advanced level chess. If you're used to playing chess against a single opponent, you come to understand their style and gameplay. If you have a good understanding of that individual style or gameplay, you have better chances of accurately predicting their moves. However, if you're playing a brand new opponent, it is extremely difficult to predict their movements because you lack the knowledge of their tactics or essentially the doctrines that they operate off of. Over the course of this game, you're not just randomly playing against the pieces of a chessboard, but you're trying to predict the doctrine and thought process of your opponent. This is also useful in the fact that if you play against the same individual multiple times, it causes you or demands you to use different doctrines or approaches to warfare. That way your enemy cannot predict your movements on the battlefield. While this game does have the burden of requiring 3 individuals to play, I do believe it's an excellent tool to teach individuals about predicting enemy actions and trying to make a plan in a vacuum of information. My 9th recommendation has to do with the speed of cognition. How fast can you make choices on the battlefield? When they held the very first chess competition, they found one participant took over 2 hours to make a decision every time it was his turn. Obviously, the rules were changed because you can't hold a major event if you're taking that much time. But it brings up a question. How much time is required to calculate and decide on the battlefield? And how much time do you really get? Some recommendations here is consider getting a timer that beeps every 10 seconds. Each player gets 10 seconds to make a move, and if they don't make a move within the 10 seconds, then they simply lose their turn. Are you capable of playing on a 10-second timer and making good choices and analyzing the battlefield? Now obviously not all decisions can be analyzed in 10 seconds, but some can. This also becomes a test of psychological resilience. If you make a bad move, do you find yourself focusing on it and wasting more time for your next gameplay, or are you quickly able to adapt and play the pieces that are currently on the board? It would be a good way to exercise stoicism in terms of just simply focusing on the problem and not your cause or your emotions connected to the problem at hand. If you find yourself playing efficiently at a 10-second rotation, consider speeding up the clock to 9 seconds, 8 seconds, 7 seconds, 6 seconds, 5 seconds. At what time do you lose your ability to make good choices because of the stress of the time limit? Another way of doing this exercise is consider being able to have the ability to move 2 pieces at one time. Again, reset the timer for 10 seconds and go for there. This becomes significantly more difficult to try to make 2 choices within that time limit, especially given the fact that your opponent has the same ability. We must test our cognitive abilities and the speed at which we can make good choices on the battlefield, and test our abilities to do so that we can be confident. Not only that, we must learn how to be resilient in the face of our mistakes. If we make a critical error on the battlefield, can we quickly gather our own emotions together? Can we quickly readdress the problem, take a look at what we have, and can we fix the problem? The 10th recommendation I have for you is definitely the most grueling out of all of them. It's the use of physical exertion while playing chess. While we think about the traditional game of chess, we usually think about it in an environment much like the picture behind me. A comfortable house, maybe an office, or maybe even the sterile classroom. But we very rarely think of something where we're physically fatigued or emotionally overwhelmed. But this is more like the situation we'll encounter on the modern battlefield. Therefore, we must prepare for it. My suggestion would be to take a chessboard and place it in the middle of a fitness field. Then place 2 cones on either side. Have the 2 players make a move on the chessboard and then sprint around these cones. The players can make moves as fast as they can run around these cones and come back. But soon they will find that the speed in which they're running affects their cognitive skill. In this way, they must balance the physical exertion they're putting into the exercise with their actual cognitive capabilities. If they run too fast, they'll become hypoxic and not be able to think. If they run too slow, then their opponent will be able to take several more turns than they will. It presents quite an interesting dilemma, and it drives home a point. One of the major points that I hope anybody that goes through this exercise draws from it is that physical fitness is more than just a test that we take in the military to prove that we're in shape. It's not enough just to be able to pass a physical fitness test. We must be able to fight as hard as the enemy, but in fighting or as running as fast as the enemy, we must be able to arrive at that point and still be able to outthink them. If you've never gone through exercises that challenge your mental capacities while you're under extreme physical duress, you may be at a disadvantage if you actually arrive on the battlefield. So I suggest trying this technique and seeing if it worked for you. Obviously, the types of exercises or challenges that could be added to this scenario are quite diverse. I'd also recommend a punishment for the loser of the game, say having to run an extra mile, just to drive home the point of being physically fit so you can be mentally alert and prepared to make decisions on the modern battlefield. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a chance to try one of the techniques for increasing the complexity of chess to mimic the reality of the modern battlefield. If you have other suggestions on how to increase the complexity of chess to engage with what you might actually encounter on the battlefield, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section below. Just like in my earlier video concerning the realism of simulation training and the training value that draws out of it, any chance we have of increasing the realism of the exercise we go to, we can drastically increase the training value we receive from it. So hopefully you have a chance to try one of these 10 techniques so you can maximize what you're learning from playing the art of chess. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter, where you can find more videos on military self-development. I'll see you next time, but until then, work on your self-development so we can ensure the United States military can dominate the modern battlefield.